Hey everybody, this is my 40-gallon waterfall tank, and today's activity in the fish room is going to be doing a simple water change, filter change, and any other little odd maintenance I need to do while I'm in there. The only thing I really want to show you on the before part of this video that we're going to be able to compare is the water flow. And you can see right there where it's trickling down. But if you look up into the back, you'll see where that white ring is. The water sprays out of that center section in a 360-degree spray pattern, and I put that white piece of plastic on there to keep it from spraying up and over top the back. It wasn't quite overspraying, but it was close enough that I wanted to prevent that from happening. So make a mental note of how little water you can see flowing out of there right now. All we're going to do is actually change the filter. I'm not going to get in there and clean the pump or anything like that, but you can see it's a fairly low degree of water flow. We get down here, it's barely running down across that stick. And we get down here and we've got that little bit of trickle coming down. And then of course we've also got not terribly tannin stained water. I did a fairly big water change on this tank, I don't know, about a week ago. But we've got a little bit of tannin stained, and you already saw the flow rate, so consider this your before, and there's your after. So I actually wound up doing a little more in here than I anticipated. I did a really big water change, and while I was in there I was trying to gravel vac a little bit, and I wound up knocking a few rocks over. And if you will notice, I've got that large rock leaning up against that smaller rock right there. Both of them are interesting enough looking rocks in their own right, but by stacking them up like that, it only provides, or not only provides some visual interest, it also provides a little bit of habitat. But while I was in there, I noticed there were some smaller rocks that were just kind of lying around that used to be stacked up that had sort of fallen over, and I pulled a few of them out. I put them in the other room. And then I found a large rock that was just sort of lying across the bottom, and it wasn't really doing anything. It wasn't serving any purpose. I think originally I had it in there to help hold down that piece of wood, because originally I brought that wood in. It was a broken branch that had fallen out of the tree, so it was a dry, dead branch. It had fallen naturally. So that gives you an idea how dry it was. So I had to really pile some rocks around it. You can see it goes way on up there. It was a fairly large piece of wood, and that has actually been broken down from how large it was when I got it from the outside. I brought it in and I realized that was not going to work, so I broke it down to as small as you see it now. Anyway, it's been in the tank long enough that it doesn't really need a bunch of rocks piled on it to hold it down anymore, and so I removed that rock, which is pretty significant. Again, it was just sitting in there lying across the bottom, serving no real purpose. So I pulled that out, and then a few of these sort of smaller type rocks over here got removed, and so that opens the tank up a little more. And it also, as small as it may be, it does add for more volume of water. All the displacement those rocks were causing is now filled by water. So it allows me to have a little bit more water in the tank, for whatever that's worth. It also gives me easier access to the bottom, so when I get in and gravel vac, I actually am able to get to the gravel a little more frequently. There's less places for the mulm and everything to get caught. If you're not really familiar with this tank, I don't have really good vigorous circulation and that kind of filtration. So in order for me to get the mulm and the detritus and stuff that builds up out of the tank, I have to remove that by gravel vac rather than relying on a filter to pick it up. So in this case, I now have easier access to the gravel. It opens it up, it makes it look better, and I still allowed for a little bit of visual structural appeal while it's in there, a little bit of something for the light to sparkle off of and catch your eye. I like the way the line follows the same line of the wood. So there you go. I wipe the glass down inside and out. I use my melamine sponges on the inside, of course, and then I use the regular old paper towel with some Windex on the outside. Got that looking nice and clean. I also tested the nitrates. Oh, you know what? We'll get back to that in a minute. Let's look at the water flow. That was the other thing we talked about in the beginning. So that gives you a better look at how much water we've got flowing now. It's honestly not flowing a lot more differently across the wood. I think the wood's at too steep of an angle for the water to really hang on to it and flow across the wood and down onto the rock back there. In fact, you can kind of see it's already dried out. The water used to go down this piece of wood, but that was before we put these daylilies in there, which are growing out of control, but we'll get to them in a minute. And it was a little less steep of an angle, and I think the water was able to sort of flow down it, so it's kind of a shame that that's the case, but there's a reason for that, and again, we'll get back to that. But we do have a pretty significant water flow. And that's what that's supposed to look like. So if that white ring wasn't on there, that would be squirting out of the top just as much as you see it there. Well, pretty much as that. The water is still coming out the top. It's just being forced backwards and down the back. So it is restricting the flow a little bit, but it's not sealed off at the top. It's just sort of blocking the direction the water can flow. So the water is still flowing out of that in a 360-degree pattern. Again, it's just sort of being pushed into the back. So my plants here are growing like crazy. My bleeding heart right here, for my regular viewers, you'll know I just brought this in not too long ago, and it was pretty small when I brought it in, and I said it was going to get a lot bigger, and believe me, we're hardly getting started on this thing. I'm almost afraid of what it's going to look like. I'm almost regretting bringing it in. Of course, I can always cut it. It is pretty much a disposable plant. It's going to go off like a firework, fast, furious, and then it's going to be over by June. We'll be taking it outside and chucking it anyway. Now, the tuber and everything will still be there for next year, but the plant itself will turn yellow and just die back by June. So, again, it's going to be a huge plant, a lot of interest, a lot of three-dimensional texture, a lot of pretty flowers on it, and then gone. But, again, that's going to get really big. My daylilies back there are shooting up. That's these. They had mud sort of packed around the tubers, and so I had to wind up putting a bunch of rocks. I sort of stacked the rocks around it to keep the water from eroding the mud away too much, and that is what that stick is propped up on now, on top of those rocks, rather than just sort of lying against the back like it used to, and that's why we've got it at that steeper angle now. So the other thing I did recently was, despite the fact that my water sprite is finally starting to take off and grow and look pretty good, it's adjusted to the huge amount of light it's getting now. Water sprite is typically a fairly low light plant, and I just put it out like basically under the equivalent of the blazing midday sun from a water sprite point of view, and it's taken a little getting used to, but it's gotten used to it, and it's now starting to take off. I also threw in a bunch of sweet woodruff and stone crop back here. So for all that muddy ugliness and all of that green cyanobacteria and everything you can see growing back there, it makes it look like a mud puddle or a quagmire or something outside. Hopefully this sweet woodruff and stone crop will actually grow in sort of a cascading effect. It might even grow all the way down to the water surface, and we should get a nice blanket of delicate white flowers all over that at some point, especially with the sweet woodruff once that starts going. And, well, for me anyway, I should even get a nice fragrance out of that as that sweet woodruff takes off and gets going. So that's going to be something to look forward to as that develops too. My geraniums and my Rex begonias over here just kind of doing their thing. I did cut them and rotate them. They were growing so much this way that I put them that way, and so now it's going to sort of force all the growth this way again. It gives us a little more breathing room. You can actually see that side of the tank now. I also changed the filter in my little side filter here. I did slow the water flow down. You can see that the duckweed that's swirling around in front of it's not doing too much swirling there. I slowed it to a fairly sedate flow. It's as low as it'll go. And lastly, we're going to have a look at some nitrate tests in a minute. But my columbine over here is still doing well and starting to grow. This is a cutting of a the geranium. That looks like it's taking root and growing and doing fine. And then these are two tiger lilies that I just transplanted into this little planter here. And they should get about as tall as me. and will definitely grow up and into the light. You know, again, we're probably talking about somewhere up here is where we're going to see the flowers on them. I might have sort of, you know, bit off more than I can chew on them too. They're really big plants, so we'll have to wait and see what happens with them. But my daylilies growing so vigorously got me to thinking about the nitrates, and I got to thinking, you know, I'm always talking about plants that grow fast, and when you've got a tank that's got lots of plants in it, lots of fast-growing stuff, it will just drink up the nitrates. And I've got a significant amount of plants in this tank, not a huge amount, because remember, all this stuff's in planters, not in the water itself. But all this stuff is in the water. I've got a little bit of stuff down there. So I thought, you know what, let's check the nitrates in this tank. They're usually pretty low, and I came up with that, which is ridiculously low for what most of my tanks typically look like. That is before the water change. So I thought, man, what's it going to look like after the water change? It looks identical after the water change, and I did a big water change. So I thought, you know what, let's check my well water, and you guessed it. My well water is identical to before and after here in my tank. So what that tells me is my system is out of salt. And I checked, and sure enough, my reservoir is out of salt. I honestly don't even remember the last time I put salt in it. So I will have to do that. I do have some salt. I just need to put it in there. I have a water softener, but it doesn't actually soften my water, but it sort of does. I don't want to get into a big discussion about that right now, but it does function as a water softener, and therefore I do need to put salt in it because of the ion exchange medium, and it needs the sodium in there for that ion exchange, and without it, it's not removing the nitrates from my water, and now it's building up to about 5 parts per million in my groundwater, and the groundwater may actually have more than that. But some of it's beginning to get through my system. That doesn't mean, you know, there might be 20 or 30 parts per million in my groundwater, but some of it is beginning to get through my system. So that means I need to up the salt in there and get it up and running, and next time it backwashes, it'll take those nitrates right on out, and we'll be back to 0 nitrates in my groundwater, or at least in my tap water, I should say, once it's gone through my system, not my groundwater necessarily. Anyway, there you go. There's my big after look. I told you we were going to do most of this video on the back side of it, and I will step back here and give you sort of a broader look for a moment and say thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed that. Don't forget, this one is my waterfall tank, and I will see you real soon in the next one.